Hi, this is Pastor Tom. This week we are studying Ecclesiastes chapter 7. This chapter starts with a series of wise sayings which might remind you of the book of Proverbs. One reoccurring word in the first half of this chapter is the Hebrew word for good. You can see how often this word occurs if you go to www.netbible.org, click on the Hebrew tab on the right-hand side, and hover over the word good or better in the English translation. You'll see that it's used in this chapter 15 times. This word good has been a very important word in Ecclesiastes. The preacher has been looking for what is good, and now he tells us some of the things that he has found. The wise sayings in these first 13 verses are held together by common themes. For example, notice in the first 6 verses the preacher tells us that a sorrowful heart, brought on by a death or a funeral, are better than feasting and laughter. A reason for this is found in verse 2. Death is the end of a man, and the living take it to heart. Many times in this book, the preacher has thought about death, and here he exhorts us to take this truth to heart as well. In light of the truth that death is the end of every person, verses 7 through 12 give us insight into wise living in the present. Money is mentioned a few times in these verses, which isn't surprising since Solomon has already told us what he attempted to accomplish with his wealth. Verses 12 through 13 are the first verses in this chapter that mention God, and in both those verses we are told to consider what God has done. Verses 15 through 18 give us some confusing commands about not being overly righteous and overly wicked, but these verses continue to bring up death by the word perishes, destroy yourself, and die before your time. This is something we'll need to look into, because he tells us it is good that you should take hold of this, and connects it to the one who fears God. The last verses extol wisdom, but drive home a point about the impossibility of a righteous man who does good and never sins. And then the preacher appears to give an example of there being little or no righteous person, for he tells how he has searched among thousands of men and women. He ends by saying one thing alone he has found: God made man upright, but they have sought out many schemes. He hasn't used that word scheme before, and it's used 3 times in these verses, so that might be a clue as to what's going on here. There are many confusing things in this chapter. I would encourage you to ask the Lord to give you insight and understanding as you read through this chapter several times this week. I look forward to discovering His truth with you. God's blessings on your week.